Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantaram Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we begin a new section today. It's on the 5 layers. We saw that the earlier section was about the 3 layers called the 3 bodies, the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. And as I mentioned last time, the coverings over the Atman can be thought of in different ways. One is the 3-fold division, which we saw. And now we begin the section which looks at the same coverings in a 5-fold method. So they are called 5-fold layers. And this entire section is an answer to the disciples' question earlier on about how to distinguish between the self and the non-self. I mean, that's the whole point of the book, about discernment, looking deeply. When things have gotten mixed up, if we look deeply, we are able to distinguish between the different elements. And so, what the book will do now is take up these layers one by one, describe what those layers are, and after describing each layer, the book will show why that is not the Atman. So that's the process. Because, I mean, the problem is this. Although we are calling it layers, in the Upanishad, they are really called the Atman. It's like this. For instance, the first layer that we will study now is called Annamaya Kosha. Anna is food, and because this body is primarily a product of food, and therefore this is just saying this is a food transformed into this visible form, so to speak. And so this layer of the external body is called Annamaya layer. The Upanishad, the Taittiriya Upanishad, refers to it as not as layer, the word is kosha, not as Annamaya kosha, but as Annamaya Atma, Annamaya self. And the reason is that this is how it appears. This is how we go about our daily life, looking upon this body as me. Right now, we do not look upon the body as a covering. I mean, when you are reading a book like this, intellectually we are visualizing it that way. But every moment of our life, we do not remember this is a covering. This is just me. And therefore, this body acts as if it is the self. And we mistake it for the self. Now, we will know that it is not the self only when we find that there is something else inside which looks at the self, looks like a self. Sri Ramakrishna used to tell a story about one villager goes to the capital of that kingdom and wants to have a meeting with the king. Now this villager has never been to the palace, never seen the king, and he's come from some distant rural part of that kingdom. So he's very impressed by looking at this big palace. He had never seen such a grand building before. And as soon as he goes at the first entrance of that palace itself, there are these finely dressed guard there, so well dressed. This poor guy had never seen anyone so well dressed. And so he thinks, oh, maybe this is the king. And he's about to bow down to him. And then this gateman who was at the gate, he said, no, I'm not the king. Go inside. And so then this person walks inside the hall. Now there's another one entryway there. As you know, some of these VIPs, you have to kind of go through several layers to meet them. So there is this second person. He's even better dressed, and he looks even more regal and royal. So then this person said, oh, maybe this must be the king. And again, that person said, no, I'm just an employee here. Go further inside. And so the story goes on to say that on the way, he meets with several of these people who were guarding the gates and mistook them to be the king. And until at last, he stands in the presence of the king, and he said, then he has no doubt at all. He knows exactly, I'm in the presence of the king. That's a beautiful example about what's happening to us. The first thing that we all encounter, and that all we are aware of most of the time, is our body. And therefore, this is the self. Until we discover now inside the body, there is the life, prana. And then we say, oh, maybe the prana is the self. The once I discover that there is something inside the body, then this body no longer appears as the self. The person at the gate is no longer the king. So then this body which appeared as the self now becomes only a layer. Then the person thinks, oh, maybe this prana is the Atman. Then the prana says, no, go inside. There is somebody else there. And then you go deep inside, oh, there is the mind there. And then you say, oh, prana is only a layer. So in this way, we go through these different layers over our personality, first mistaking them to be the self, but then later on discovering that they are only a layer. Now, in order to discover the error, we need to look deeply at it. Now, that is the process that will be described, that each layer will be described, and then you say, look deeply and you will find, no, this is not the Atman. And the book will explain why it is not the Atman. So that's the general methodology in the section that we will study now. So let's begin with verse 149. Koshairannamayadhyai panchabhiratma na samruto bhati nij shakti samutpannai shaivala patalai rivambu vapi stham. Blanketed by the 5 layers, such as the layer of food, annamaya, which arise from its own power, the Atman remains hidden, just like the water in a pond remains hidden by the moss. So 2 important points here. The first question can be, from where do these layers come? And we get the answer here, they arise from its own power. Now, what do you mean own power? The power of ignorance. We have seen in the earlier sections that the ignorance has primarily 2 main powers. The power to conceal, called the avarana shakti, and the power to project, called the vikshepa shakti. So it's by the force of these 2 powers, all these layers have emerged. And therefore, the Atman, which is self-effulgent, because this can be another question. how can that which is self-effulgent be hidden? And the answer is, it is as if hidden, just the way water, clear, pure water, can get hidden when covered over with moss. When water remains stagnant for a long while, you must have seen in the ponds, kind of a moss gathers over it, and then you're no longer able to see the water. But all you need to do is to kind of just move the moss away, and you discover the clear water underneath that. So that is how ignorance covers the Atman and then projects these layers above it. Verse 150. Tat shaivalapanaye samyak salilam pratiyate shuddham trishna santapaharam sadya saukhya-pradam param pumsaha. The pure water, which takes away the pangs of thirst and brings immediate joy, is seen clearly when the moss is removed. Pretty straightforward and clear. Look at the phrase, the pangs of thirst and brings immediate joy. Because similarly, this is just an example given, similarly, the pangs of thirst stand for the existential suffering that we have by being locked up, imprisoned within this body and mind. So that suffering will go away, and that supreme bliss, we have happiness now in life, but it comes and goes. It's short-lived. But that highest and most intense form of bliss can be with us forever, and suffering can go away forever once we are able to look deeply and discover the self. That's the idea. Again, discovering the self really means discovering it to be my own self. So we are not going to see the Atman as an object, just like I see the table and chair in front of me. That's not how we see the Atman. We see the Atman as, this is me. So it's the self-perception, not an objective perception. Verse 151. Panchanam api koshanam apavade vibhatyayam shuddhaha nityanandaika rasaf pratyag rupaf paraf swayam jyotihi. The Atman, who is pure, eternal, and unalloyed bliss, indwelling, supreme, and self-effulgent, shines when all the 5 layers are removed. The Atman who is pure, the word Shuddha, pure, is often used to show that it is not mixed up or contaminated by anything else, because there is nothing else. The Atman is all that exists. And that's how the phrase pure is used. Eternal. Because it is the only entity, it is eternal. Because what makes things mortal are certain external forces acting upon them. But when there is nothing outside to act upon it, then that entity becomes completely independent. It's not even bound by time, because time itself is the product of ignorance, and therefore is eternal, unalloyed bliss. Unalloyed, because right now some might say, well, we do experience bliss in life now and then. But it's not unalloyed, because our bliss, our happiness that we experience is punctuated by sorrow and suffering. But that's the story of our life. Yes, there are things that make us happy, but after some time, some kind of pain comes, and then we suffer. And after some time, some kind of happiness comes again. So we just go back and forth between joy and sorrow. But this is unalloyed, means it's just pure joy. It never is mixed up with anything else. indwelling. It's not an object, it's within, it's me, supreme and self-effulgent. It's, in other words, it's with the help of the Atman that we become aware of everything else, but we don't need anyone's help to see the Atman. The Atman is self-effulgent. It's a little bit like we need light to see in darkness, but we don't need to bring another light to see this first light. The light reveals itself and also objects around it. 152. Atmanatma vivekav kartavyo bandhamuktaye vidusha tenaiva nandi bhavati swam vijnaya satchidanandam. In order to be free from bondage, the wise should practice discernment between the Atman and the non-self. It is only this that brings happiness through the knowledge of the self, who is being, Sat, consciousness, Chit, and bliss, Ananda. So these three attributes, Sat, Chit, Ananda, are often used to describe the nature of the Atman, the nature of that ultimate reality, the nature of who I really am. If we want to be accurate in our language, then we have to recognize this, that ultimate reality, my true self, is inexpressible, is beyond the reach of the mind. And therefore, no language, no words can truly describe it. So while Satchidananda is a good description, it's not a perfect description, because we are trying to describe the indescribable. So when it is said that the self is existence itself, is being, a more accurate way to express that is the self, the Atman, is not non-being. So you can say what the Atman is not. So the Atman is not asat. Put positively, we say it is sat. But really, an accurate, philosophically accurate language would be to say what it is not. Similarly, the Atman is consciousness. What is really meant is, it is not material, it's not matter, not jada. Similarly, bliss, it means that Atman is not absence of bliss. You cannot say what it is. Actually, in the Upanishad, although the phrase Satchidananda is more popular, the Upanishad actually uses a different attribute there. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, what it says is the Atman is Sat, Chit, the word is Jnana, consciousness. But the third attribute is not Ananda, but Ananta. And Ananta means infinite. So the self, the Atman, is being, consciousness, and infinite. Now, there is another passage in a different Upanishad called the Chandogya, which says that Na alpe sukham asti bhumaiva sukham. And what it simply means is there is no joy in the finite, in the limited. Joy exists, bliss exists only in the infinite. And it's because of that connection that this infinite, Ananta, automatically leads to Ananda. So the Upanishad really says Sat Chit Anantam, being, consciousness, and infinity. But because only in that infinite the supreme bliss is possible, we then use the word Ananda here. So only when we are able to distinguish or practice discernment between the self and the non-self, the Atman and all these layers, only then we will experience the self, which is of the nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda. Verse 153. Munjadi shikamiva drishyavargat pratyanchamatmanam asangamakriyam vivichya tatra pravilapya sarvam tadatmana tishtati yah samuktaha. So how do we make this distinction between the self and the non-self? This word describes it. A person attains freedom by discerning the indwelling, unattached and inactive Atman from the sense objects, the way a stalk of grass is separated from its covering sheath, and after merging everything in the Atman, remains identified with it. So, a person attains freedom by discerning the indwelling, we saw that before, unattached, because there is nothing to which it can attach itself, there is nothing else, and inactive. By inactive is meant all action occurs in the material things. All karma is attached to material things. Our body and mind are material, so karma is possible only in the body and the mind. There is no karma in the Atman. Atman is not affected by karma at all. Remember, sometimes karma is called the law of karma. Atman is beyond all laws. Otherwise, it would not be free. But the body and mind are not free because they operate under the law of karma. And so, just as a great care is needed to separate the stalk of the grass from the sheath, the thin sheath. I don't know if any of you have tried it. Sometimes you just kind of, it's a very delicate process. But if one can do that, that kind of attention, that kind of care is needed to separate the self from the non-self. And after merging everything in the Atman, now what does it mean, merging everything in the Atman? Because there is really no everything in one sense. So what is meant is that when one thing is merged in something else, then we don't see the first thing at all because it's completely merged. And so that is the idea here, that when you merge everything means to recognize that everything doesn't have an independent existence apart from the Atman. In other words, the Atman alone exists. So now the next few verses will describe the characteristic of the layer, which should be easy because we are all familiar with our body. So this is precisely the description of our physical body. Dehoyam anna bhavano annamayastu koshascha annena jivati vinashyati tadvihinaha tvakcharma mamsa rudhirasti purisha rashihi nayam swayam bhavitumarhati nitya shuddhaha. This body is the layer of food, annamaya. A product of food, it is also sustained by food and destroyed without it. It is a mass of skin, flesh, blood, bones, and filth. It cannot be the eternally pure Atman. It's kind of interesting that we think of this body as me, but if the contents of the body were spilled, it would be a sight people would close their eyes from, wouldn't even want to see. It's not attractive at all. And right now, because it is just covered by this skin, we're not always aware of what stuff is there inside and what's going on. That in itself, it's terrible. In fact, that's why sometimes when these terrible accidents occur and there is people die, and sometimes the bodies get mutilated, or during, you may have heard already that there was this big earthquake in Afghanistan recently, and they are expecting nearly 1,000 people have died, have lost their lives. In events such as these, when we see the mutilated bodies and the contents of the body spilled, not everyone is able to see even images of them with a straight face. And yet, the things that we are not able to see are exactly the things already present right here, which I'm saying, this is me. And that's why sometimes they say beauty is skin deep, because really, to just kind of go inside the skin, it's a completely different picture inside. And that's what is mentioned here. And therefore, when we think of the Atman as this eternally pure, shining existence, the body cannot be it. 155. Purvam jane radhimrute ruterapi nayamasti jata kshana kshana guno aniyata svabhavaha naiko jadascha ghatavat paridrishyamanaha swatma katham bhavati bhava vikara veta. And now we are told why this body cannot be the Atman. The body exists neither before birth nor after death, but only for a short time. Its traits are transitory and its nature is changeful. Like a jar, it is divisible, inert, and perceivable. How can it be the Atman who is the witness of all changes? So all of the characteristics of the body are completely contrary or completely opposite to the characteristic of the self. The body exists neither before birth nor after death. So it's not eternal. It's got a very limited span of life. Its traits are transitory. It's always changing. We know we pass through different stages in life. When you're babies, then childhood, then youth, the body is changing all the time. In fact, I believe it is said that at the quantum level, that probably every 7 or 8 years, every cell in the body has already changed. But yet we think this is the same body that we have had. The example that comes to mind is, if there is a building, a brick building, let's say, and every day you just change one brick of that building. Just remove one brick and replace it by an exactly identical brick. Now a time will come when all the bricks in that building would have changed. But because their change occurs almost imperceptibly, and the replacements are almost identical with what was there before, we might not even know that the complete building has changed. It's like a farmer who once had this big axe which he used for his work, and he was very proud of telling people, this has been in our family for several generations, and we keep on using that same axe, except that the handle has been changed about 10 times, and then the front, the end portion, we have changed about 3 or 4 times, but it's the same axe. So in the same way, that's essentially what our body is. It's an illusion, even at the physical level, to think that this is the same body. At the cellular level, it's changing all the time. And therefore, the Atman, which is unchanging, no change is possible there, cannot be, the body cannot be the Atman. 156. Panipadadiman deho natma vyangepi jivanat tattat shaktera nashacha na niyamyo niyamakaha. The body is not the Atman, since it can live even without its limbs, such as its arms and legs, and since their functions remain unimpeded. The one who is the controller, Atman, cannot be the one who is controlled, the body. In other words, sometimes if there is a mutilation that occurs, if someone loses their hands or the feet, the body cannot continue on its own. But because of the presence of the Atman, it's possible then, for instance, sometimes people use prosthetics and still are able to go ahead. But there is no mutation that can occur in the Atman. And that is what is mentioned here. The Atman is the one which controls the functioning of the body. And therefore, the body cannot be the Atman. The body is the one that is controlled, and the Atman is the one that controls the body. 157. Deha tad dharma tad karma tad avasthadi sakshinaha sata eva svatas siddham tad vailakshanyam. Being the witness of the body and of its attributes, activities and states, the Atman makes its distinction from the body self-evident, because the Atman is the witness. So, Deha tad dharma, all the attributes of body. How do we even know that the body has those attributes? Because of the presence of the Atman. The Atman is pure awareness. Awareness is the source of all knowledge. In order for me to have the knowledge of this table, I must first be aware of its existence. And that awareness becomes possible because of the Atman, because the Atman is awareness. And that is why even the characteristics of the body I know because of the Atman. The activities of the body and the different states, whether it's waking, dream, deep sleep, all of these things I'm able to know because of the Atman. And therefore, because the Atman is the witness and the body is the object of its perception, therefore, the Atman makes its distinction very self-evident. In other words, not too much explanation is necessary. It's so very obvious. 158. Shalyarashir mamsa lipto malapurnoti kashmalaha katham bhavedayam veta swayametat vilakshanaha. The body is a bunch of bones covered with flesh, filled with filth, and extremely impure. How can it be the Atman who is the knower distinct from the body? So these are the verses that will then show why the body cannot be the Atman. 159. Tvang mamsa medosti urisha rashau aham matim mudha janaf karoti vilakshanam veti vichara shilo nijaswarupam paramartha bhutam. A collection of skin, flesh, fat, bones, and filth is what a fool thinks of as I. A thoughtful person knows the nature of the Atman to be different from the body and absolutely real. The book is really saying, as long as I keep on thinking this collection of skin, flesh, fat, bones, etc. is me, I'm a fool. That's it. It's not directly saying you're a fool, but he says only a fool will think like that. Which is the way to encourage us to look deeply and find out that this all along in my life up to this point, that what I am seeing as me has been a mistake. That the real me is inside. I should know the distinction. When I receive a gift, I should know the distinction between the gift wrap and the gift inside. If someone gives me a gift and I just say, and it's beautifully wrapped, and I just say, this is wonderful, and preserve it and worship it, then I would not even know what the gift is, because I'm just taken up by the cover itself. And therefore, to know myself, I'll have to look deeply, because the real me is deep inside this. So body is like a kind of a gift wrap. 160. Dehoham ityeva jadasya buddhihi dehe cha jive vidushastvaham dhihi viveka vijnana vato mahatmano brahmaham ityeva matis sadatmani. A stupid person thinks of the body as I. Again, this is a way of saying, if you think of the body as I, you are stupid. So don't think when it says the stupid person thinks the body as I, that someone else is being referred to. It's really all of us. A scholar thinks of both the body as well as the embodied self, jiva, as I. The great soul who has discerning knowledge always thinks of the Atman as I am the infinite, Brahman. So there are three distinctions made here. A stupid person just thinks, this is me. And death really means my existence comes to an end. And the most worldly, materialistic way would be that there is no such thing as an afterlife, no heaven, no hell. If the body ends, everything ends with it. So that's like the height of stupidity. But then, there are some people who are not so stupid. So they are referred to here as a scholar. So a scholar might think that there are really two ways the I can manifest. Or I could say I have one I for this life and another I for what happens after death. And so those who believe in heaven or hell or afterlife, that death doesn't end everything, so they say, right now, this is me. But they are enough intelligence to know that a time will come when then this me right now, the pointing at my body, the body is going to go away. It will be buried or cremated, but it's not something that's going to last forever. But then they say, but I will still be there. And then this I, which is inside the body, the jiva, the individualized self, will then go to these other celestial worlds, to heaven or hell. So at least they have a little bit more refined idea, if you like, that their I is not limited only to the body, but to something else inside. But then the third, and the person who has this discernment, who has learned to look deeply, discovers that neither this I nor that I are real. That the only I that gives me the knowledge that I am the infinite one, that is the only real I. As long as I feel I am limited in some way, I haven't yet known the truth. And once I know the truth, then I don't even have got to tell anybody that I know the truth, because there is nobody apart from me. So when you find people claiming, I know the truth, I have attained the highest, then you say, well, who are you telling all this to? If you have attained the highest, you are the only existence. You don't have to go on beating your own drum, because there is nobody else. And so this is something very important to keep in mind. So this is a very nice verse, which kind of shows a little bit of a distinction, that limiting our I only to this body, but there is a higher way, that there is something else inside, some inner being who survives death. But the highest knowledge is, I am the infinite one. And the implication of being the infinite one really means I don't go anywhere. I don't come, I don't go. Because coming and going is possible only when we are limited. For instance, in this big hall, I can go from one point in one place, I can go from one corner to the other corner only because I'm smaller than the hall. I can go from point A to point B. In order for me to go from point A to point B, there are two things necessary. I should be at point A first, and I should not be at point B. Only then I can go there. Now suppose I'm already there in both point A and point B as well. Then I can't go there. If I'm already as big as this hall, if I fill this hall completely, I cannot go anywhere in the hall. And that's why once I know my true nature, which is infinite and eternal, I don't come, I don't go. There is no coming, there is no going. All coming and going is for as long as we are limited. 161. Atratma buddhim tyajamuda buddhe tvang mamsa medosti purisha rashau sarvatmani brahmani nirvikalpe kurushva shantim paramam bhajasva. O foolish one, give up thinking of this cluster of skin, flesh, fat, bones and filth as I, and think of the self of all, Brahman, as I, and thus attain supreme peace. So beautiful, very powerful verses. And that's why if you feel so inspired, I would encourage you to read at least 1 or 2 or 3 verses every day. Because kind of filling our mind with ideas like this, it'll remain in some corner of the heart as we go about our day's activities and will help. Because otherwise, only thinking once in a week for an hour, we sit here and then say, I'm not the body, I'm this infinite one. And then for the rest of the week, we go about as if we are this body. That may not be so helpful. Somehow these ideas should stick around in our consciousness somewhere, influencing, however subtly, our way of thinking, our way of doing. That is the way we will begin to see gradual change occurring within us. And therefore, this is not simply once in a week, or we meet once a week, but this is, the ideas somehow should remain in our head as often as possible. 162. Dehendriyadau asati pramoditam vidvana hamtam na jahati yavat tavanna tasyasti vimukti vartapi astvesha vedantanayanta darshi. As long as the scholar does not give up the deluded sense of I in unreal entities such as the body and the senses, there is no possibility of freedom even if the person is an expert in Vedanta philosophy. This is very important. Let us never think, even after we finish the study of this book, oh, now I have read this profound Vedanta text and therefore I am already free. No, just studying books or merely intellectual understanding does not necessarily guarantee freedom. And that's why I said, it's not just about studying and appreciating what the book is saying. If what it says rings true, if it resonates with our head and heart, this way of thinking, then somehow it must enter into our daily life. It won't happen immediately. It will be very subtle. It will be very gradual. But unless and until that happens, we won't see a change in our daily life. We won't become better versions of ourselves. And that's really important. Because what's the point? We study hundreds of books, and then after years of study, we look back and say, oh, nothing much has changed. I'm still the same person. Then we just wasted our time. And therefore, intellectual understanding has to go hand in hand with the real development of our character, a development in our understanding, but also developed in the clarity of our mind, that we are able to see things in a more clear way. And that will bring about the changes that are necessary. 163. Chaya sharire pratibimba gatre yat swapna dehe hridi kalpitange yathatma buddhis tavanasti kachit jivat sharire cha tathaiva mastu. Just as you have no sense of I in the shadow of your body, or in the reflection of your body, or in your body in the dream state, or in the body of your imagination, so should you not have it in your body in the waking state. It's pretty straightforward, but it's so important. So when we walk in the sun and you see a shadow on the road, you know, this is me, but that's only a shadow. We don't think that the shadow is me. Or if I see my reflection of mine in the mirror or in water, if I see my reflection in the water, I don't think, oh my God, I've drowned. No, there is no me sense there. So what this verse says is, just as I do not have the sense of I in my shadow or in my reflection or in my imagination. In my imagination now, let's say I go somewhere, and in my imagination, let's say I'm hurt. I fall down and I'm hurt. But I know I'm imagining. I don't feel anything like, oh, I'm really hurt. Because I'm just imagining it. But this, anything happens to this, it's very real. And so what this verse says is, this is as shadowy, as unreal as the shadow, the reflection and imagination that we have. And the last verse in this part, 164, Dehatma dhireva nrinama saddhiyam janmadi dukkha prabhavasya bijam yatastatastvam jahitvam prayatnat tyakte tu chitte na punarbhavasha. Since thinking of the body as I is itself the seed that produces the suffering of birth, etc., in people whose hearts are attached to the unreal, you should make effort to destroy that sort of thinking. When that is removed from the mind, there is no chance of rebirth. So this is again important. We might think, oh, I'm just thinking of the body as I, as long as the body is there. Once this body goes, then this I will automatically go. That's the wrong way to think, because this thinking of this body as I is itself the cause of a future birth. So by looking upon the body as this, I'm already sowing the seeds to continue revolving in this circle of samsara more. And therefore the work of looking deeply cannot be postponed. We cannot say, oh, let me now just look at it intellectually, and then in future I can think about actually practicing it. And what this verse points out is, no, start right now, because every moment I spend thinking of the body as me, I'm making it more difficult to not be reborn again. I'm making it more difficult to become free again. So this is the description that the book gives about this external layer. It also gives reasons why that layer cannot be the Atman. So when we meet next week, we will go to the second layer, the pranamaya kosha. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, feel free to ask.
So on one hand, Swamiji, Atman and Brahman are infinite. There is no. But we also talk about these layers, which are apparent, and how go back to the question Swamiji had asked you earlier as well. Why do we think about, why does the book or this text give us this analogy of it is infinite, but yet there are these layers that cover this infinite. Mm-hmm. Why is this analogy used of layers? Because to me it seems like it is not a helpful analogy, because as soon as we start thinking about layers, mind tends to go into more like finite. Layer seems like it is finite. Seems like, also related, just one other thought, Swamiji. We are told that focus on the spiritual heart, that it's somewhere here. That also seems to indicate, oh, there's something here, in this shape. So how can this infinity, how could we be searching for this infinity in this limited space? So that's generally, I hope I'm...
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. No, thank you for that question. So the answer is this. If the book were simply to say, you are the infinite one, and then end, stop. And just reading that, we become enlightened. Problem is solved. We don't even need to study this close to 600 verses. But when people are told, you are the infinite one, they say, how can I be the infinite one? I am this being. So it's not that the book is creating the layers. The awareness already exists. So it's not that we need to study this book to know that I have the layers. Even without ever knowing anything about Vivekachudamani or any of these Vedanta texts, a person sees this is me and this is the body. So the book is not creating these categories. These categories already exist. So what the book does, it says, takes up what the present experience of people is and then say, but that's not you. That's only a layer. So a layer is not something that is created by the book. It's only being understanding of what people who are deluded, who are in ignorance, are already seeing. And so the book tries to help them see things more clearly. That's the idea. And that's why I said that although we are calling it layers, the Upanishad just calls them self. The body self. And only when I know that there is something else inside the body, then what appeared as self becomes a layer. So it's a kind of a play. You begin to thinking of it as a self, then you find something else, say, oh, this is only a layer. Then you go and say, oh, this is only a layer. So you discover that these layers are layers only when you look deeply. If you don't look deeply, they just appear as me. This is who I am. That's how it appears. Yeah. Okay, so we will stop here today. When we meet next time, we will begin with the description of the second layer. And once we begin to see that second layer, then we see that the body then automatically becomes a covering. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. On Sunday, our subject will be happiness or contentment. And on Saturday, we'll have meditation as usual. So we'll conclude with the prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.